Banking 2.0 is a very simple concept. It's a change in our banking system, and yet it would solve a tremendous amount of problems. It would get rid of the cyclical pattern we have of recessions and booms, and it would also reduce the cost of financial services so that people had more money in their pocket to increase consumer spending. So our current banking system is based upon banks having deposits, and then they can lend and invest from that depository base. And that notion that a bank must have money in order to lend money comes from the days of gold, in which it was a very tangible thing. If the bank did not actually have the gold, how would they lend money? And so that idea of a balance sheet in a bank was established back in the days of gold. In 1913, when we established the Federal Reserve, that became a central bank, and it opened the door for a new way of thinking of money. And we still kept the idea of the deposits with the lending, but we established something called fractional reserve lending. So in other words, if a bank has $1 million in deposits, it can actually lend $4 or $5 million. It creates the money out of thin air because it's chartered and allowed to do that. That's called a fiat currency. Money is an invention of man. And so fiat currency is just as legitimate as gold is, because it's another invention of man. So why not take it one step further? The trick really is having the right money supply. We don't want to have too much money in the money supply because it gets inflationary. And yet you want enough money so there's always a liquidity to meet the transactions that you need. So when you have a central bank, what you've basically done is given it the authority to create the money. It creates the money out of thin air. If you've heard of quantitative easing, QE1 and QE2, the central bank was creating money and it was buying bonds with it to begin to pump more money into the economy. So we've long understood that the central bank creates the money. So if you look at a bank, the bank's lending activities are based upon getting a qualified borrower and making sure that qualified borrower can get a loan. Currently, the bank looks to its own deposit to do that. But there's a better way. If we look at the central bank as the source of capital, because it really is, banks can get rid of having a balance sheet. In other words, if you went to JP Morgan and you gave them a check for $1,000 in a deposit, it would go into the central bank. And then when you wanted your money back, you would just ask it, the central bank would recreate it and get it back. So now you have a depository system that will never go bankrupt. You'll never have a run on a bank because the central bank will create the money when it needs it. Likewise, when JP Morgan wants to make a loan, it gets a qualified borrower, takes the documents, goes to the central bank and says, I've got somebody who qualifies for a $500,000 mortgage. The central bank would create the $500,000, give it to JP Morgan, who would lend it out, and now you would no longer have to charge interest. It doesn't cost the central bank any money to come up with money, so why should it charge interest? JP Morgan would still earn the origination fee. It would still earn the servicing fee, but it doesn't have a cost of interest to pass on to the borrower. What that does is it takes the cost of buying a house and it cuts it in half. So you've cut the cost of banking in half, you've put more money in the hands of the consumer, and the consumer spends more and the economy takes off under Banking 2.0.